back to another video. So today we're going to be going over some common mistakes when keeping reptiles. And a lot of these you typically see more with beginners, so hopefully if maybe you don't have a reptile yet, watching this video can help you avoid those mistakes. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into it. So the first one would be impulse buying and not doing research. You see people go into reptile shops and they see a reptile and it's cute and it's tiny, and they get it, and then they get it home and realize they don't have anywhere to put it, they don't know how to take care of it, they don't know how big it's going to get, its lifespan, they don't know any of that, and a lot of times that's when reptiles end up getting neglected and not well taken care of. So overall, you just want to avoid impulse buying. If you see an animal that you're interested in, take note of what it is, then go home, do your research, look at their size, their lifespan, their care requirements, and if it's still something you're interested in, then go look for a reputable breeder and buy then. And that's going to set you up for success rather than just impulse buying when you don't know how to take care of something, which is really just kind of setting you up for failure and setting your reptile up for a not so great life. So either way, just avoid impulse buying. It's not a good situation, so just try to avoid that. The second mistake would be not buying from a breeder and buying from like a large chain pet store, or in some cases doing wild caught. Both of these you want to avoid because in both cases the reptiles are generally going to have health issues or parasites and they're not going to do as well. Wild caught reptiles typically don't adjust to captivity and they typically won't eat. Sometimes they have parasites. Reptiles that you get from large chain pet stores typically come from very large wholesales rather than a breeder who's actually passionate about what they do and focuses on breeding a healthy animal with good bloodlines, socializing them. A lot of times large wholesales will sell reptiles too young, and again they typically have health issues and just end up crashing right after you get them. So generally you want to avoid that and just buy from a reputable breeder that is passionate about what they do, takes the time to socialize their animals, make sure they're healthy, eating well, and overall in good health before buying them, or selling them rather, than before you buy them. The next mistake would be using reptile stores, especially large chain pet stores, as an example of how you should take care of your reptiles and assuming that the products they sell are reptile safe and a good idea to use. And I know it may seem kind of surprising that it's not always that way, that a lot of times it's actually incorrect and sometimes the products they use aren't safe. And as someone who works at a reptile store, I can say that this is true. Even at the one that I work at, unfortunately, I don't have control over it. But reptile stores are not always good examples. A mistake that you often see in reptile stores would be them using a coil UVB bulb for chameleons. Coil bulbs can be fine for some reptiles, but in the case of a chameleon, they do not penetrate far enough down into the enclosure, and they don't have a high enough UVB output. So it's really not producing what a chameleon needs, and a lot of times you see those being used in chameleon enclosures in large chain pet stores or even smaller pet stores. A lot of times you'll see them use that, and that's actually not what you want to use. So sometimes they're not always using the correct supplies and whatnot to take care of an animal properly, so don't always follow that as an example. Another thing would be that the enclosures aren't always set up well for permanent housing. Sometimes they're okay as like a quarantine enclosure, but generally they're too small and they don't have enough enrichment. So just because that's how the reptile store has the enclosure set up doesn't mean that's how you're going to want to have it set up long term. Another thing that I mentioned as far as being a mistake is assuming that all of the supplies a reptile stores sell are reptile safe. So in this case, an example would be heat rocks. A lot of reptile stores sell them. You really don't want to use them. This is a mistake that I have made as far as using one. My snake got burned from it. He's okay now, not her, it's my other one. He's fine now, but he did get burned, and even if you use a thermostat with these, because they're supposed to look like a rock, they have like lower areas and higher areas. So some areas are going to get really hot, some aren't going to be as hot, and they tend to overheat even if you use a thermostat. But unfortunately you see them in reptile stores a lot, but even if you see them, and even if they're being used in that reptile store, generally not a good idea to use them. Another thing, couple things you often see in reptile stores would be calcium sand and the colored heat bulbs to use at night, like the purple ones or the blue ones, or in some cases red. You actually don't want to use those. They can actually cause eye damage to reptiles, and calcium sand can also cause a lot of health issues, so you don't want to use it. So again, those are just some things that you often see in reptile stores that you actually don't want to use. So Just because a reptile store is selling them or using them doesn't mean it's a good idea to use it. So again, just do your research and make sure that you're using safe equipment for your reptiles. Another mistake you oftentimes see beginners making is using improper lighting, especially UVB, which is extremely important for reptiles. Some reptiles don't require it, but the ones that do require it is extremely important for them. So whatever reptile you have, if it needs UVB, make sure that you do your research and make sure that you're providing the right UVB, whether it's desert or tropical. Just make sure you're providing the right UVB because it is very, very important. Another mistake you see a lot is improper diet and not providing enough variety and multivitamins and calcium powders. You tend to see this even more with things like bearded dragons because people will feed them the commercial pellets, which in my opinion don't provide enough nutrients. Really, bearded dragons should be fed fresh fruits and vegetables with the salads and whatnot, and then a variety of insects with multivitamins and calcium powders. You often see this a lot with turtles where they're only fed pellets. And in my opinion, it's just not nutrient dense enough and it's not enough variety. So whatever reptile you have and that you're feeding, make sure they're getting the correct amount of variety, multivitamins, calcium powders, and just so that their diet is on point, because if it's not, it can cause a lot of health issues and just overall, it's not a good situation to have improper diet. So make sure that that's something that you're paying attention to and that you're making sure stays on point. The next mistake is one that you see way too often, and in some cases it's actually not a mistake and it's just people think that it's acceptable, and that would be keeping a reptile in an enclosure that is too small, and in a lot of cases also not providing enough enrichment. The size of your reptile's enclosure is so important for them to be able to grow healthy and not cause bone damage and just like being stunted. So make sure your reptile has enough space. In the case of a snake, I would recommend giving them at least enough space to stretch out on. At least 2 sides that meet, if not 1 full side, is ideal. So either way, just make sure they have enough space and also make sure they have enough enrichment. A lot of times you'll see like big time ball python breeders, it seems to do the most. They'll just keep them in snake racks, which can work. It can be fine for some species, not all species, but it can work. But they'll give them like just newspaper and a plastic water dish and that's it. And that's just not enough. Reptiles, they need stimulation, they need enrichment, things to climb on, dig around in, smell, feel. So just make sure you're providing enough enrichment and space for your reptile. The next thing, I kind of already touched on this with the impulse buying, but that is not understanding your reptile's adult size and their lifespan. A lot of times, again, people go into a reptile store, they see a snake or a lizard, whatever it is, and it's tiny and it's cute, and they take it home. And in the case of something like a Burmese python that grows extremely fast, like a Burmese python, if provided with enough room, within the first year they will get 6 to 8 feet long. And that's when people get uncomfortable with handling them and they're not cleaning the enclosure as frequently as they should because they're scared of them. Snakes just aren't getting taken care of well. So just make sure you understand the adult size and the lifespan, because some snakes, like the children's python right here, can live 30 plus years, or red-tailed boas can live 35 to 45 years. So they have a much longer lifespan than most people realize. So make sure you understand the lifespan of a reptile before taking it home and make sure you can commit to that lifespan. The next thing would be not researching the reptiles tolerant to being handled and their temper. Some species, such as a green tree python, are more of a look-at species, not a handle species. They just don't typically tolerate it well. Some do, but most of them don't. Then you have other species like bearded dragons where you walk past the enclosure and they will be scratching to come out and hang out with you. They bond with you. They'll sit in your lap all the time. Like, they enjoy handling. Green tree pythons don't typically want anything to do with it. They would rather just be left alone. So if you want a species that's more of a display animal, then there's some species that are better with that. Then there's other species that are better with handling. So depending on what you want, just make sure you research it and make sure that it fits what you want, and you're both probably going to be happier that way. So it's just something to keep in mind and make sure you research before purchasing the reptile. The next mistake that you see people make a lot is just assuming that all reptiles are suitable for beginners. This is not true. A lot of species are not fit for beginners, such as iguanas, even though you may see them in somewhere like a Petco or PetSmart, which again you generally don't want to buy from. But just because you see it at a reptile shop, or just because it's there and it's cute or it's pretty, doesn't mean it's good for beginners. So just, again, that comes down to just doing your research, looking at their size, their lifespan, their care requirements, their temper. and making sure that if you're a beginner that it's something that you can handle and take care of properly. So just keep in mind, not all reptiles are good for beginners. Some are much better than others. So again, just do your research. All of the mistakes I mentioned in this video can be avoided by doing your research and taking the time to learn and make sure that you understand all of the care requirements for your reptile. So just before you get a reptile, just make sure you do all that and you can avoid all of these mistakes. So just do your research. That's pretty much what I'm saying with this video, is do your research. And with that being said, that wraps up today's video, so I hope you guys enjoyed it and maybe this made you aware of a couple mistakes that you're making or would have made without watching it. So again, the whole point of this video was just to help you guys avoid that, and also a reminder to just do your research and make sure you understand how to take care of a reptile before getting it. So anyway, make sure you guys also jump on over to Reptile Rave on Instagram and give me a follow there. And also like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. So I hope you enjoyed.